Hi, this is Ronika Vahi. Today I have with me someone who's going to help us all learn not just about writing tips and experiences that writers share and insights that they provide, but he's going to tell us something from his very personal experiences that are going to let us learn how to be brave because he's bravely fought a lot of things, among them a very extreme OCD and a ruptured brain aneurysm. So I have with me today Andrew Davie, who's a writer and podcaster from the US. And he's a survivor, as I said, of a ruptured brain aneurysm. And just to give a glimpse into his profile, he's worked with a theater company, he's been in finance, and he's taught uh, in different parts of the world also, in Hong Kong, in Macau, and also in the US, of course, where he taught students with certain learning disabilities and attention deficit disorder. And throughout, he's been writing, he's written a lot, and he's written screenplays, he's written fiction, which is not just short fiction, not just short story, but novellas as well. And he's also written creative nonfiction and essays, and a lot of his stuff is available on his website, and which we'll share the details about in a while. And he's very recently, on the 29th of June, which was the third anniversary of the day when he collapsed owing to the condition that we've just been talking about. He On 29th June, it was the anniversary. So he released his memoir called Land of Illusions, in which he talks about other things as well, about his relationships and jobs and other things, a lot of personal stuff. And on the 1st of July, again, he released another novella, his latest. So, congratulations on your latest releases, Andrew, and thank you so much for taking out the time for this interview.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
So, your memoir, Land of Illusions, as I just mentioned, is something very personal, right? So you're talking about various things: online dating, your OCD, your recovery from your aneurysm. But what I'm interested in knowing is what motivated you to come up um, with a work of this sort. It's very different from what you've written in the past, right? Which was most of it was fiction. So how did you convince yourself to share the kind of things that you have shared in this? Because a lot of people wouldn't share these things even with their friends, right? Because they would feel hesitant and they would feel scared of being judged.
Well, when I learned I was going to go teach in Macau, this was back in 2012, I had kept a journal. So initially, I thought I would just write about my experiences teaching in Asia. I thought that would be an interesting insight. And then when I moved back to the United States and I started dating, I found a lot of my experiences were really funny. Um, and I thought I could include those. So it could be about teaching and it could be about dating and things like that. When I moved back to the US and I had my aneurysm, I thought that would be the culminating thing that I could write about. So then I thought, well, I'll include dating, OCD, teaching, working various jobs, the aneurysm. And when I was recovering from the aneurysm, one thing that really helped was when I would read on message boards from people who were experiencing similar things. Uh, Knowing that I wasn't going through this alone or that it wasn't just me was really helpful. And I thought, hopefully, this book will be able to help other people deal with either funny or tragic situations they find themselves in. And knowing that someone else has gone through it would help them. So that became more important to me than worrying about what other people might think about things that I've done or things that might be embarrassing.
Yeah, I think it helps people connect with you, because I think everybody faces some or the other problems in this online dating world, and of course it's like the kind of things you talk about. Um, and you even share go to this extent of sharing your chats, which is I think very and I think to some extent everybody can relate to it. Like everybody makes mistakes when they start talking to people, and or also other things like frustrations with jobs and wanting to pursue your passion or even your OCD. Uh, to some extent, everybody faces. I think maybe not to the extent that you suffered from it, but a lot of people have this kind of thing that if they're keeping their clothes, they're arranging their clothes, they want them to be in a certain line, right? Or they would for everything they would count, they would decide on a certain number. Like for example, their birthday falls on number 7 on the 7th of some month, right? So everything has to be in sets of 7, etc. Right? So, but yours was something which was. I mean, quite extreme. And I think you shared about it and how you tried to convince yourself that the thoughts that you're having are not really, very rational. But still, you cannot just control having those thoughts. I think the same thing works with people with phobias as well, right? They know that their fear is irrational, but they just cannot help it. So I think in that sense, it's very important to have a work of this kind. So, but I think particularly about your aneurysm, that bit where you share about how you use quotes and different examples of other people to convince yourself to keep fighting. That is something I would really want you to share with the viewers of this video, because I think that's something very inspiring. The way you try to that long road, you traversed. You tried to how you tried to keep yourself up and continued even with your writing.
Well, most unfortunately, I don't think there's really a lot of research that's been done for people who've experienced what I have at my age. There weren't any warning signs. There weren't, I don't smoke. I don't do anything that would have precipitated this. So, uh, knowing that there wasn't a lot of research or a lot of support that I could get from people to say, by the way, what you're feeling right now is completely typical. So going through most of it was really difficult to find a balance, to the point where I would feel comfortable. The physical recovery happened pretty quickly. And thankfully, most of the physical problems that I still have are more of a nuisance than a problem. And I've adjusted to incorporate, like, my vision and balance still aren't back fully, but I'm sort of comfortable with that. But the emotional recovery took a really long time. Uh, Many of the goals that I had had before the aneurysm either weren't as important anymore, or they weren't things that I felt I could achieve. So I had to sort of recalibrate and think, okay, well, these were the important things that aren't important right now. What can I move forward with? What's going to keep me motivated? Um, and thankfully, I had really good support from my family and friends to sort of help. Um, and thankfully, I could still write. So I thought, okay, that's something that I can use to work forward, and then eventually I will find more motivation. um, Obviously it became a little bit more difficult with the pandemic because many of the steps I had taken forward were canceled. So I think that, again, it's more of a universal thing. A lot of people will find themselves in these positions where they've tried to do things that were no longer doable, that's out of their control. But I think, having certain things like writing, and then eventually realizing that there are things out there that I may not be aware of that I will find to be motivating. Um, just having that outlook. And I wish I could say that I was able to get there through just hard work and struggle. But I think it was also enough time had gone by to the point where I had healed enough that I could um, kind of process everything and feel comfortable. But yeah, those having things that I was passionate about that I could count on. Recording a music podcast was helpful, and then writing was helpful, and even thinking about teaching again was sort of something that I worked toward. So having things that I could still do, but also keeping in mind that there are things out there that I'm not aware of. Just sort of being optimistic was difficult, but that was helpful.
Yeah. So try to get more involved in your passions, and I think it's something that for writers, of course, and for writers, people who love the arts, it's another degree of attachment. But I think for other people also, it's like they go to music or films or literature, when they want to just relax or feel more positive about life in a way. So, and like you said, you have a music podcast, right? So and like other people who are interested in literature, we have different kinds of passions from allied fields like painting, sculpture. You have a passion for movies. Also, like you make so many references throughout your work, your memoir about movies. And talking about your music podcast, I'd like you to tell a bit about it, because and it has a very interesting name as well, a fistful of faceful, right? So, how did you? I'm just curious to know how you came up with this name. What's the story behind that?
So I think many years ago, I was spending time with a friend one evening, and we were talking about the Clint Eastwood movies, A Fistful of Dollars. And I think as a joke, we kept changing the title. So it would be a fistful of something else. And I think he may have said A Fistful of Faceful as sort of a joke. But I remember thinking that could actually be a pretty funny title. So that's how the title came about. And the image on the podcast is Clint Eastwood from A Fistful of Dollars, except the Iron Maiden mascot Eddie, his face has been superimposed. And initially, I started the podcast in 2013 with my colleague Martin, who is a very meek British gentleman. He and I both taught together in Hong Kong, and he mostly listened to Britpop, which is sort of very soft and soothing. And I thought I had just heard a podcast myself with these two comedians where one of them tried to get his friend to listen to music that he really enjoyed. It was called Analyze Fish. It's about the band Fish. So I thought, why don't I do a podcast where I try to get Martin to listen to heavy metal music? And that was the genesis of that podcast, was just basically me trying to convince Martin. And it was, it started out, I thought it would be a fun way for us to just spend time together. And, instead of just grading papers or seeing him in the office, it would give us something else to do. So we did a year's worth of episodes. And then when the pandemic hit many years later, I had still sort of recorded episodes with a couple of different guests that I would find. And then during the pandemic, a marketer who I'd become friendly with, a guy named Matt Bacon, I emailed him and said, I have a podcast. If bands want to be interviewed, or I can feature their music, because right now so many shows are being canceled and they don't have an outlet for their music. And then it sort of took on a new format. So I began interviewing bands or playing music from bands that are more contemporary, rather than more of a historical approach that the first season was. So these days now, I just sort of on my own, I'll try and find bands who don't really have a big following and they're looking to sort of make the next step. And I'll try to expose their music to people. And it's just, it's just fun, really. I've met a lot of really great musicians by doing this. And, hopefully I get to find good music from it. So it's a win-win situation. I get to help bands by showcasing their music, and they help me to stay engaged with, working on projects.
Okay, so for your podcast also you've had a whole journey, right? From the point where you started in 2013 to now, and as a writer, of course, you've been there for years. And so, what is the destination that you want to reach for you as both a writer and a podcaster? What defines success?
Well, I think when I was I had gone back to graduate school for writing, and when I was in graduate school, so this was from 2010 to 2012. I think success for me at the time meant publishing work, or getting some sort of recognition. I always looked at it more like the writing process was a means to an end. And then since then, I've sort of realized that that's a really difficult goal to have. Um, and I've tried to find the enjoyment in just the process. Um, and if I publish anything, or people like it, or the podcast keeps going, that's sort of gravy. That's like extra. Um, so originally the goal was, I need to be published. I need for this to happen. And recently I've sort of switched my perspective so that it's more about just being able to do it and finding the enjoyment, and then whatever happens from that is sort of extra.
You're talking about, of course, the enjoyment aspect, right? But I think as a writer, even if you work very hard and you think you've given your best, at times it does happen that you get some negative remarks or harsh criticism. Um, I think that's bound to happen when you are in a creative field, right? So if have you ever received any kind of feedback or harsh comment that you felt that was maybe you didn't want to accept that, or what was the thought process? Did you try to rethink what you produced?
Well, these days, thankfully, I haven't really gotten much negative feedback. Um, but the negative feedback that I would get was in graduate school when I would do writing workshops, and my stories needed a lot of critiquing. Uh, and really being put in that position, I sort of learned how to accept negative criticism, and find what could be helpful. Uh, so I sort of view it to the point where I try not to take anything personally. If it's if it's positive or negative, I usually try to separate, um, what can be helpful to toward, moving forward with anything. Um, which can be difficult. I think that's a skill that people have to develop over time, is just try to take their ego out of it. Um,
Yeah.
so I've been able to do that. It's taken a while. I think that, the first year that I was in graduate school, I wasn't used to getting criticism, so I had to really sort of, it was a big adjustment. Um, but I think over the years, I've been able to sort of learn what criticism is objective, and helpful, and what criticism is subjective opinion, where, people would rather the story do something else. Um, and that's just something that I think over time you begin to develop.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a very important point that you're making. That that writers or anybody in any field should be able to distinguish between what is constructive criticism and what is criticism just for the sake of it. So yeah, thanks for that insight. And okay, so tell us something about the new work, the new novella that's just released on the 1st of July.
Okay, so uh, it's called Leviathan Rising, which was one of the titles that they were going to use for the book Jaws, about a great white shark that attacks a New England town. Um, so years ago, when I was working in theater, I wrote a blog, or what I'd hoped to be a blog, about a diary that was found where someone was on the film set of Jaws while it was being shot and ended up influencing the movie. Uh, and then recently I remembered that idea and I thought, why don't I turn it into a mystery, like a murder mystery, where someone is hired to go to the film set and find out why everything is going wrong. Um, the in real life, the shooting of the movie was really difficult. The shark wouldn't work. There were a lot of problems. So I took a real life scenario and I thought, why don't I find this story, and it would play to my love of movies. I could make a lot of references, um, but I could still make it sort of an enjoyable crime fiction. So imagine, I guess, if you're familiar with the movie Forrest Gump, um, the character meets a lot of real life people and ends up influencing events in history. So my lead character ends up going to the film set of Jaws, and he ends up meeting, Steven Spielberg, and he ends up influencing a lot of popular culture at the time. So it was a way to keep writing crime fiction, but also play to my love of movies. And I think, like with most of my novellas, it's a very quick read.
Yeah, so you have a range of work, right? Even in fiction, it's very your books are very different, and you're coming up with so many different ideas. So one thing I want to ask, I mean, it's a question every writer gets, right? But I will still ask it, so aspiring writers can benefit from it. So if at the start of your writing career, you had received maybe a list of do's and don'ts, imagine that if you would have received that list from your experiences, what have you learned? According to you, what should that list have contained?
Well, I think the most important thing was I just wrote frequently. Um, and I think the biggest thing is to sort of manage your expectations. Uh, it's going to take a long time sometimes to get where you'd like to go. Just with regard to writing, I think my list of do's would probably be, uh, think of writing like you're training for a sporting event. You're trying to condition yourself so that you can perform under any circumstances. There are some people who can only write under favorable circumstances. They need it to be completely quiet, or they need to have a number two pencil, or they need certain things. And I think if you can create the situation for yourself so that you can write under any circumstance, that's a great way to think about it. Obviously, I like to do certain things. I like to drink a lot of coffee in the morning. Um, but other than that, which I could probably give up and still be productive, um, I don't need to be in a certain place or to have certain music playing or certain things like that. Um, that would be on the list of do's. Probably that would be the only do I would say. Other than keep writing. Don't get
Yes.
discouraged.
Mhm.
Um, the other thing I would say is over time you'll learn uh, what feedback is helpful. Um, you'll learn how to interpret feedback from other people and figure out what's helpful and what's not going to be helpful. So that would be, but that's not really something you can learn by yourself. That's something that sort of happens over time. So those would be my three do's probably. Um, the only don't I would say is don't give up. Um, try to. I think like I had said, it'll probably take some time. Um, I wrote at the beginning of my career. I tried to write very specific stories that were uh, sort of based on my experiences, nonfiction, but I would change them to fiction. But very few people would get all the references. So I sort of had to learn over time to how to better present, what I was writing, so that even if someone didn't know the movie I was referencing, they could still enjoy the story. Um, but that took a lot of time. The only thing that helped was time. So for the don'ts, I would say don't give up. The other thing I would say is you'll frequently hear um, suggestions from writers, like famously, I think Stephen King writes 5,000 words a day. So you'll probably feel like, oh, if I'm not writing 5,000 words a day, I'm not doing this correctly. And I think it's important to learn, about other things that writers do, but don't feel like if you're not doing that, you won't be successful. I think we all sort of discover our own method as we go.
Yeah, I think on social media, I've seen people discussing how many words do you write per day, or how many hours a day you write. I think it's more about inspiration, right? I mean, of course, you need a certain amount of discipline. That if you've decided on a date that by this date your work should, at least the first draft should be over, right? So you stick to that plan. But I think more than sticking to words, it's important to remain inspired to work and be, I think it works differently for everybody, like you said. But the sticking to words or feeling competitive that this one is writing 500 words and I'm managing only 200 per day, I think that's, or 200 or 150 per day. I don't know whether that comparison is valid.
Yeah, I mean, I think the everyone will want to compare themselves to other people, which is natural. And
Yeah,
I think over time you become more comfortable knowing what works for you. Uh,
yeah.
you know, Again, that's just one of those things that you have to experience.
Mhm. And anything else you'd like to share about your podcast, or from your writing, or anything else you'd like to share with the viewers of this video?
Uh, no, I mean, I think we've covered pretty much everything. If anyone wants to find my work, it's just www.andrew davey.com, and there's links to the podcast, to the Facebook group I help manage, to everything. Um, but yeah, no, and I hope everyone is doing well out there. Keep enjoying everything and writing, and I will leave you with a one of my favorite quotes that was in the memoir. Um, each of us is in the same storm, but we're in different boats. And I felt like that was a good analogy for everything. So um, just keep at it. Don't get discouraged. And yeah, that would be my 2 cents.
Thank you so much, Andrew, again for taking out the time for this interview. And to all the viewers, my review on Land of Illusions is there in the description box. And the description box also has the Amazon links for Andrew's latest novella as well as his memoir, and the links for his website, his podcast, and the Facebook group that he just mentioned. So if you enjoyed watching this video, please do like, share, and subscribe. Thank you.
Thank you so much.